Ready to dive into the world of AI and creativity? Generative AI is changing the game for innovation. But behind every smart machine is a human making it all happen. Designers aren't just creatives, they're the directors steering AI to create responsibly with intention and inclusivity. Get ready to explore the past, present, and future of AI with tips on using this powerful tool to fuel creativity in ways that are inclusive and rooted in real world expertise. Today, we'll dive into and talk about art directing the future. AI meets imagination. In the keynote panel, we will meet Emily McReynolds, head of global AI strategy at Adobe, and TB Bard-Levins, director of product equity at Adobe. Ready to get into today's discussion? Let's meet our guests. Hi, Emily. Hi, TB.
Hey, how's it going?
We're going to dive right into it because we've got some questions, and there's a hot topic right now that's become a key part of today's creative culture, and that's AI for creative teams. So, TB, I'd like to start with you. What do you see as the real value or opportunities of generative AI as a tool for designers?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many possibilities, right? First, to start with efficiency. The great thing about AI is its ability to help cut some of that extra weight out of the creative process where there's redundancies and things where you don't really need a lot of skill, let's say, but more so just attention to detail. And so having technology and tools help cut some of that out so the redundancy is taken away and you have more opportunity to focus in and really anchor on the outputs that you want is super important. Also, it allows you to create in ways that you haven't before to be able to potentially create or develop new or different ways of visualizing your work. There are ways of like potentially experimenting with different outcomes. There's so many opportunities when it comes to AI at the intersection with creativity. And really, it's limited by your own brain cells and the ability of the technology itself. And what we're finding is that there's so much opportunity, there's so much magic that comes with it. And so just being able to have the time to play with the tech and to see what it can do and to see how it can be useful through your creative process is an important part of learning and using the technology.
I love that. You mentioning the visualization aspect and the experimentation is huge part of working with generative AI. But Emily, I'm curious, how can organizations strategize and determine their needs for AI as a tool for creativity and marketing?
I think this is both a human creativity and a business process question. There are so many opportunities with AI and especially with generative AI in augmenting human creativity. So one of the things I often say is, the key is figuring out how to work with it in your process. There's so many opportunities for new types of brainstorming, for refining an idea you have without having to go through multiple layers or rounds. You can just add one more prompt. And so it makes a lot of things we're used to doing easier. And then we can spend our time doing more of the fun things we want to do instead of resizing an image 17 times. That's our usual thing we say. You can be coming up with new ideas, and it's a business process question because there are so many ways that we build in the different creativity aspects. So it's not just thinking about, what's in the ad, what's in the promotion. It's what is the copy you're going to use. I've been writing for many years now, and I still, when I see a blank page, it's just a hard place to start. And being able to put an idea into generative AI, or even better, using some of our tools like Acrobat AI Assistant and pulling from previous documents. So I can say, I want to say something like this, and it gives me that starter paragraph where I can really get into the flow of what I like to do. So it's a practical way of improving employee experience.
I love that. And you mentioned getting into the flow, which is so important no matter what type of creative you are. And so much of what you shared is right related to business use. But let's talk about the responsible usage of generative AI. So, Emily, what questions does leadership need to ask to know how to guide and implement AI standards for their organization and employees?
I think this is such an important question. I've talked to so many companies that are trying to figure out what it looks like to do this within their existing values, within their standards around, responsible innovation, or if they don't have those standards yet, how do they build them? So we're publishing a set of best practices in the next month, and it builds on over 10 years of my experience both in an academic and a creative setting and inside of companies, thinking about not just what questions do you ask of the vendors you might be getting the tool from, how is the system trained? Where did the data come from? Was it tested for bias? What filters are on there? How are you going to use my data? Are you going to train your model with my data? All very important questions. But you also need to know the answers you're looking for and why you're asking those questions, right? And I think those questions are also helpful in figuring out what your company's standards around using generative AI are, how you want to think about what your company's values are in relation to this new technology. And as an individual, it's so important to me to be using a tool that doesn't increase the harm. One of the things we worry about is that our new emerging technologies are going to reinforce existing problems or existing biases we have. And so as an individual, I want to pick tools where I know the company's being responsible in thinking through the potential impacts of those things.
I love that insight. And, you're mentioning things and questions that are essential to ask for businesses and organizations. And TB, I would love to hear your perspective because the rapid pace of the development with this technology, with that, how can we use these tools creatively and yet mitigate risk within brands and copyright issues?
Yeah, it's a really big question, and a lot of organizations are still coming to terms with what that actually means. And some things that we like to think about are through the lens of one, let's say from a agency perspective. If you're representing humans, there's I think Dove is a great example of an organization is like, hey, we don't want to represent humans in certain ways when it's still real use real humans because there are reasons behind that. One is accurately representing people and their culture. Um, we know that a lot of these models, like while they're amazing, they're also still learning. They're still understanding context. They're still learning colloquialisms and hyperlocal nuance to people and culture. And so one of the best things we can do is like consistently still lean on humanity while also seeing ways in which the technology can help out. And so let's say again in a product scenario, if you have a person who is they're just taking a picture of their hand and you want to show six different products, you can use the technology to switch out the product while still maintaining the integrity of that human that's holding it. And so there are ways in which you can sort of mitigate risk and bias by thinking about the subject, thinking about the outcomes you're driving for, but also thinking about the market and understanding that, in these different markets, understanding the humans that are in them, especially when you think about international. Many times we're thinking hyper local, hyper US or the global north. But if you think about a lot of companies are really trying to expand into countries like India and Brazil and Indonesia and places like that, Kenya. And in these communities, things look very differently.
I love all of that perspective. But let's shift and chat about organizational preparation. So, for both of you, and Emily, I'll start with you. What advice would you give to teams that are eager to adopt AI, but uncertain with how to do so in a way that aligns their values and also maintains public trust?
It's a challenge. I mean, we have been thinking about this every time a new technology comes along. And with generative AI being talked about as though, it's the first major revolution since the internet, like this is changing everything, it can seem so big and overwhelming, and you have trouble figuring out just like, where do I start? And you have to think about the things TB was talking about. We talk a lot about cultural localization and making sure things are representative in different geographies and in different communities. And so you want to make sure you're protecting that and being attentive and making sure bad things don't happen. So when Adobe got started, they looked at generative AI and said, how do we have this as a method to elevate the impact of individuals, teams, and Adobe to reimagine ways of working? So I'm going to take us back a little bit to what I was talking about earlier. What are your company values? How do you want to represent your brand, your people out in the world? It's really important to me that when I go out and talk about Adobe, I can say that Firefly was built on licensed data and public domain content, that we've made a commitment not to scrape the web. And in terms of like maintaining public trust, that, we say trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets, right? It's so easy to have something go wrong that it's really important how you handle it. And that should always take you back to your values.
I love that. And TB, what are your thoughts on that same question?
I know that with this technology also comes a lot of fear, but I think that the power of this technology is also the power to help upskill and reskill whole communities of people, including folks that are in companies right now who are like, hey, I'm really worried about my current role. It's like, well, there's actually, like, I'll be honest, like Gen AI is still tough to use. There's still like takes some skill. And so prompting and prompt engineering is really like it takes time and effort, but it does take a level of skill. And so I think that like really investing in humans and their ability to develop the skills to create the outputs that this technology can do is super important. And so while it is, informed by a lot of bits of data, it's still new and different. And so that newness is fun, it's exciting, but it also comes with a level of requirement, including respecting humans who are on the other side of receiving those outputs.
I love all of those insights. Thank you so much to both of you. Great advice and points of view. We have some questions, so let's get right into it. How can we better communicate the benefits of using AI to decision makers, particularly when it comes to efficiency and improving workflows? And Emily, I'll throw it over to you to start.
Improving workflows is, I think, one of the critical considerations here. If you're talking about companies, people don't want to spend the effort to learn a whole new tool if it isn't actually going to make their workday more efficient, if they aren't going to have a better experience. It's so important to think about what training is needed, how people will integrate this into their workflows and processes. And so when implementing AI and considering those like workflow experiences, it is somewhat of a review process. Maybe you go look at some of the things you haven't examined in a while with some new eyes and some new incentives to figure out how to make it more efficient, how to improve it.
That is all great stuff. And I know I'm excited to see what's coming. But TB, I'd like to hear your perspective on how we can better communicate the benefits of using AI to decision makers. What can we do to help that process?
And we hit the nail on the head, right? It's really being able to assess your organization and say, how exactly would we utilize this? And to what end? I do think values comes to play in this as well. There are also questions around like what is or isn't in our control, and are we okay with that lack of or additional control? And so things as it relates to data that's being collected, privacy, as well as autonomy and agency, transparency. Like a lot of these themes come up when we think about use of this technology, whether it's internal for like internal use or if it's internal for external output. It requires some really deep thinking, some assessment of what exactly will we use this for? What are the non-usages, and are we okay with that? Even from a leadership perspective, is do we have the understanding as a leadership team to be able to actually and effectively deploy any of these AI technologies, or do we need to hire the right experts? Do we need to fill in those gaps? I feel like one of the most important pieces that any organization should think about when deploying this is not only how responsible is it, as far as like who we're using this from, what third party, but also what are our own levels of responsibility that really need to be able to anchor on. The really tough part is when you have exciting new technologies, is being risk averse, but you sort of like you need to be able to be willing to take the risks while also understanding what the impact of the risks might be.
This has been so insightful, and we so appreciate both of you sharing your insights. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
I've learned so much today about how we may work with AI and loved hearing from both Emily and TB. Thank you to our guests, Emily McReynolds and TB Bard Levins from Adobe, for bringing their insights and guidance to help us navigate the future of AI and imagination.